All right, everybody. This is our first of two lessons having to do with Indian nationalism and independence. So your objective for this lesson is to think about what the historical circumstances were that led to the start of the Indian independence movement. So at the end of this, in the Edpuzzle, I'm going to ask you to explain the historical circumstances that led to the start of the Indian independence movement. Let's get started. First, we're going to start with a couple prompts. I'd like for you to think back as best you can to your 9th grade year when you learned about different religions and you learned about Hinduism. What do you remember about the religions founded in India? So here we see a picture. This is the statue of Krishna as Vishnu in his Vishwarupa form. We're going to use some word association and list all words that you can think of that has to do with religion in India. So I did a little brainstorming myself, tried to put myself in your shoes to kind of come up with some of the words that I thought you guys would think of and recall from 9th grade. So one would be Hinduism. It is the oldest religion in the world. Things like Brahmin, untouchables, and the caste system, which was the social class. It exists because of Hinduism. It's linked to Hinduism. You've got untouchables at the very bottom and the Brahmin at the top. And the only way to move up into a higher social class is to have good karma throughout your life. And in order to have good karma, you need to do good things, good duties throughout life, and that's your dharma. What do you remember about the Maurya dynasty and the Gupta Golden Age? Again, these are things from 9th grade. This is ancient history or river valley civilizations. So again, some word association. These existed in the 3rd century. They are ancient civilizations. They were river valley civilizations, and you can see where their civilizations existed along the rivers. Here, they're more heavily situated. Remember what a golden age is: an age of prosperity, strong government, and economy. And this is the Indian subcontinent. A subcontinent is just a mass area of land that juts out from a larger piece of land, the main continent. And the Guptas, they promoted Hinduism but also accepted Buddhism and Jain cultures. What do you remember about the Mughal Empire? The Mughal Empire, if you recall, was our very first unit in this year, 10th grade. We spoke about how religiously tolerant they were. Here's a picture of Akbar the Great on the right-hand side of your screen. He lived from 1556 to 1605. Akbar the Great. Akbar meant the great. So if you recall from your lesson, the great was essentially how he was referred to. He commanded a very strong army, a massive navy. The empire tripled in size and wealth. It was the largest empire geographically in the world, even larger than the Roman Empire. His grandson was Shah Jahan, who was not as religiously tolerant as Akbar. And moving forward into our imperialism unit, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, what do you remember about imperialism in India? So looking at this picture, you see a white man sitting in a chair. He's having his feet tended to by an Indian. There's another Indian standing in the background. Both Indians are dressed in traditional Indian garb with headdresses on. The white man is reading a newspaper, and the Indian in the background is holding a device that looks like it could be used as maybe something that reflects light. India is typically very hot, so I can't imagine that this is something that reflects light for the purpose of warmth. So it looks reflective, it looks like it has some weight to it, so I wouldn't think that it's really a fan, but I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you. But what can we deduce from this picture? In other words, what conclusion can we draw based on what we see in this picture? Well, first of all, 18th and 19th century is when imperialism took place in India. What European country imperialized India? Do you guys remember? It was Great Britain. First, it started with the British East India Company, controlled the trade and the economics of India. The British East India Company was a trading company. It had its own army, and it hired Indians as soldiers. Great Britain eventually controlled all of the Indian government and economics. What do you remember about the Sepoy Rebellion? During Indian imperialism, there was something called the Sepoy Rebellion. Now, what you see in this picture these are Indian soldiers hired by the Great British Army. So they serve in the British Army, but they are Indian soldiers. The Sepoy Rebellion was from 1857 to 1858, and they were Indians in the Great British Army. And they rebelled against their European commanders, or they mutinied. And they mutinied because they were protesting the use of beef or pork grease used to cap bullet casings. Soldiers would have to bite the cap off of a bullet casing before loading it into the gun. And Indian soldiers had gotten word of a rumor that those caps were greased in beef and pork. So these Indian soldiers were either Hindu or Muslim. And if you recall, the traditions of those two religions, to eat beef or pork, depending on your religion, is against your traditions and your culture. So this was highly offensive to these Indian soldiers, and they mutinied against their European commanders. So here we're going to get into, those are the circumstances, what we just talked about are the circumstances that led to the start of the Indian independence movement. So how can we sum all that up and help us understand why Indians fought for independence? So here's essentially the background, the historical context in text form, as opposed to the images that I just showed you. So the British East India Company was founded in the 1600s. It's a trading company that supported the British government. The British East India Company made an agreement with the Mughal Empire that ruled most of India and set up trading forts on the coast. In early 1600s and by 1857, the British East India Company gained influence, power, and territory in India. Fast forward now, in 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion happens. The British defeated the Sepoys and took over India. And this led to complete rule by the Great British government. So the British East India Company was replaced by the government, or the British Raj, and became known as the jewel in the crown. India became known as the jewel in the crown. India was the largest and most profitable colony of Great Britain. Great Britain had strict control over India. Great Britain brought more British troops to the colony and limited which weapons Indian soldiers could handle. In the Edpuzzle, I'm going to have you answer, why was India considered the jewel in the crown of the British Empire? All right, we're seeing this picture again. I'm going to read this paragraph and then have you answer this question in the Edpuzzle. Here's your question, then I'll read the text. According to the text, how did most British people feel about Indians after the Sepoy Rebellion? All right, the text. Under the British Raj, after the Sepoy Rebellion, the British in India separated themselves from most Indians. They lived in well-guarded military camps and spent time in private clubs that did not allow Indian members, only Indian servants. As a result of living separately, British understanding of the Indian way of life and culture was laced with suspicion, indifference, and fear. So how did most British people feel about Indians after the Sepoy Rebellion? Answer that in the Edpuzzle. Here is an image of an English baby girl being carried on a palanquin by Indian bearers on the road of Nainital, photographed in 1904. So I'm going to have you react real quickly to this in the Edpuzzle. Just tell me, how does this image make you feel? India under British rule united India as one colony and modernized and westernized the region and its people, built railway, transport, and communication systems. This helped British keep control of the colony, and transported raw material from which they profited. All right, so they're uniting the colony here through railway, transportation, and communication systems. The British Raj united the colony with railways, but it divided it along religious lines. They used a policy called divide and rule. There has been always a long history of animosity or hatred between Muslim and Hindus. This goes back to the founding of the Mughal Empire. The British felt responsible because without their presence, the Muslims and Hindus would kill each other. That was the belief among the British. In 1905, the British divided the province of Bengal into East Bengal for Muslims and West Bengal for Hindus. Both sides resented British involvement and accused them of favoring the other religion. This led to more religious riots in Bengal. More disastrous effects when India gained its independence from Great Britain in 1947, and we'll talk about that. So answer this question in the Edpuzzle based on this page. What effects did British rule have on religious groups, specifically Hindus and Muslims? The question that I want you to answer here is, what effects did British rule have on the Indian economy? So let's look at that real quick. The British desire to make money from agriculture in India transformed the lives of Indians. How did they do that? They forced Indian farmers to grow crops like jute and cotton that could be turned into textiles. Indigo was used to create a blue dye so they could be exported to Great Britain. So 3 different cash crops Indians were forced to grow: jute, cotton, and indigo. This is a picture of jute. This is how it grows. Cloth that was previously made by Indians could not compete with cheaper British-made goods. As a result, Indian artisans gave up their crafts to work in agriculture or in farming. Created large tea and coffee plantations to meet increased demands in Europe and the United States. So among all these crops that are being grown, that the British Empire is demanding that Indians grow, none of these are food crops. All right, what can we suppose is going to happen? What's the effect of no food crops being grown? So answer question number 4 in the Edpuzzle. The education system in India was based on the British education system. Upper-class Indians learned to read and write in English. They studied medicine, British government and law, and sometimes traveled to England for higher education. Some saw this as an attempt to westernize Indians and replace their culture with the British. Question number 5. What effect did the British have on the Indian education system? Think back to what you have learned in this lesson. What strategies did the British use to gain, consolidate, and maintain their power in India? Think about the economy, farming control, education,